Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today we have author Jason Kiefer from New York by Skype.
Hi.
With book one of the Justice Cycle, Death. So if you love the Winchester boys or Supernatural and Frank Peretti, you're going to love this author. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Okay. I'm good. How are you?
Great. This was a really great read. But when I found out more about you, it was really concerning.
More about me? Okay.
Well, you are a minister, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in the ministry most of my life. I'm a pastor's kid, went to Bible school, been a praise and worship leader, youth pastor. I've done everything you can do in the ministry pretty much over the course of my life. Right now, I'm helping my brother in his church up here in upstate New York. So.
Very nice. But this book was very scary. And it was so twisted. How did you come up with the brothers that were so different and the choices they made, the whole mix of evil and demons? And seriously, the evil was so evil.
Well, evil's evil. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Evil's evil. I mean, if evil's not evil, I mean, there's some subtle evil too. I mean, it's not all in your face, but evil's evil. So the characters were created a long time ago. This is something I've been working on since I was a kid. I actually was a comic book guy when I was growing up. So we sat around making comic book characters, and this was one of the characters that I had created because my characters always had to be the best and the strongest. And so I created this character. I'd thought about the idea of what if somebody had to be the living spirit of justice, and what would that look like? And so that was really how it kind of got started. And then the brothers, I think we all pull from what we know. So I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, and the brother that's directly under me, he's kind of the other guy in a way. Obviously they're caricatures of my family, and I write about upstate New York because that's where I'm from and that's what I know. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of set it in this small town in upstate New York, as opposed to, even though they kind of go to New York for a while, instead of keeping it in like a big city like the Dresden Files where everything kind of centers around Chicago, why not in this little upstate New York town that nobody knows about? So it's kind of where it came from. Growing up in the ministry, you deal with the supernatural from our side of the perspective. So I've had a lot of experiences when it comes to demons and things of that nature, and from what we experience. So I just kind of, for me, it's always been real, the supernatural. So I just kind of wrote from that perspective. Obviously, this is fiction, but it's not quite as extreme as what I write about.
No, I mean, it was seriously entertaining. I like that your sources, like Cain and Abel, could be Christian. It could be from the Quran, the Hebrew Bible, Christian Bible. It was just a really good mix. But it was really, the evil that's involved is just really shocking. It's almost like a mystery as you pull all the facts together and who was where, when. And then there's almost a story inside of a story. It just makes it so engaging.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I couldn't put it down. I honestly really thought of Frank Peretti's books when I read it.
He was a big influence, obviously, growing up for me. So him, C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, R.A. Salvatore, Stephen R. Lawhead, they were kind of my biggest influences as I grew up. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. So it's kind of, actually urban fantasy, which this is what this is, was not something I read until recently. But when I started writing urban fantasy, I thought, I better start reading some urban fantasy. So now I'm in love with urban fantasy. But growing up, I was mainly, high fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi. So it was interesting.
It was great twist.
I'm glad you liked it.
I like the whole conflicting of values between characters as you went through. I thought it taught a lot of good lessons. So did you write this for adults or young adults?
It was written for adults, but I think it's something young adults. The only thing that I've had some friends who have, teenage kids, and they thought some of it was a little dark for teenagers, or where their kids were like young teenagers. But it was written for adults, but it gets pretty dark. It has its moments that are pretty dark.
Yeah, it was dark.
It does, but that's the point. I mean, even the main character, the justice, the ability to see everything evil someone's done, that wears on the soul, which is what the justice cycle is. And as the stories progress, you see what that is. It's a cycle where one begins at the beginning of this book, one story's ending and the beginning of a new one. But a human soul cannot experience looking at everything evil somebody does, and they don't see the good, they only see the evil, and having to deal with that and then be the judge, jury, and executioner of that. Someone's soul can't handle that forever. So that's kind of the idea of this, is that it is dark. But then as the stories progress, you'll see more and more of his relationship with the sword, his conflict with the sword, but also the sword begins to change to fit the wielder as well. So there's an interesting dynamic that will develop as the story goes on and unfolds in future books.
Yeah, I thought the message was strong in those areas where you have to master sin and not let it master you.
Exactly, yes. And the idea that we all face disappointment. We all face things in life that are hard. And the two brothers represent the two dynamics of which choice are you going to make? Are you going to let it destroy you? Are you going to let it make you into something else? Or are you not going to let it define you, and you're going to allow that experience to make you better in life? For instance, are you going to become if you're abused, are you going to become an abuser, or are you going to become someone who helps people who are abused to overcome that abuse? It's the same kind of dynamic that you're seeing with the two brothers here. One makes one choice to go the other way, and the other makes another choice. So that's kind of the idea. One becomes a cop, one becomes a serial killer that way, So don't want to give up too much of it.
So when you were writing, was it your intention to take a little bit from each religion and the different ways that they told the story?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, I'm a Christian, so obviously everything I write is going to have a Christian lean towards it. It's fiction, so it's not accurate, obviously, doctrinally. But it was more of an applicable thing, kind of like Tolkien when he was asked whether or not it was allegory. He says, no, he wasn't allegory, but it's applicable. And I think there are certain truths in life that are applicable, and you can see them mirrored in any religion because it's a truth. And if there's something that is true, it's unchanging. So whether you're a Muslim or whether you're a Christian, whether you're Judaism, Buddhism, it's a truth that stays the same. And that's kind of what I think you'll see. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. There are certain truths that are universal throughout everything. So in that sense, yes, they apply to Islam's. For instance, the sense of justice. Justice is an absolute truth, particularly in my story. It's an absolute truth, and he becomes the sword is the living spirit of justice. It's an absolute truth. There is no changing it. So justice is an absolute, but in the same extent, justice without mercy is evil, which is a common phrase. And so the sword is paired with a human because the human has to temper that absolute in a way, because absolutes can be evil. You know what I'm saying? There are absolute truths, but sometimes absolute without that temperance of mercy can be evil. So yeah, I think that if it does broaden in a way to any religion, because I pin on these absolute truths that kind of apply to anything in life in general. Even if you're an atheist, they apply because they are a truth. And I think I try to convey that in a subtle way, not only through the story and through the choices, but also sometimes in the conversations that the characters have. Just a subtleness. Let's talk about why he feels like he's a monster, and so he begins to subtly convey that idea, in the conversation with others, not just in an internal monologue, because it's easy for an author just to be like, here, I'm going to tell you, because he has an internal monologue, but I wanted to show that to you through his relationships and the way he's interacting with people, and as these events unfold, how his interactions change with the world around him to display what he's feeling inside. So,
no, you were really good at twisting it, and it was such an enjoyable story. I didn't think it was, there was hints of the Christian values, but it was really everybody's values. So it was really more open than putting it in the Christian genre.
Sure.
And it was great on the supernatural. It was really on point. But it was really fun to read. It was really scary at times, so I don't recommend reading it late at night.
Well, I'm glad, because you hope you're conveying that. I want it to be scary, and you hope you're conveying that to people. I wanted it to be interesting and entertaining, but I also wanted it to be a bit frightening. And there were times that I went to extremes that I might not normally do, because I wanted to convey that to people. I wanted them to get that sense of this is frightening evil that you're dealing with, because evil is frightening and it's out there, and but then also balance it with the good. But evil's frightening. I wouldn't say it's fun to write because it's, but in the same extent, it's a lot more fun to write than just basic stuff.
I don't know, but this was your first full-length novel, right?
It is my first novel, yes.
It's exceptionally well done. I would have thought you had written at least several before. The content's really well laid out. There are no grammar or spelling mistakes, which is really good.
Thanks to my editor. My wonderful editor, Lauren Moore.
That's great. Does she give you a lot of feedback when things don't balance out?
Yes. I mean, particularly being my first novel, I was like, pay for the full bore. I'm like, I need help. Make sure this is good. I don't want it to, be bad. And I learned so much about writing from that process. Having someone rip it apart that understands the storytelling process from that perspective, and being able to show you, like, what does show not tell me? We all hear that, but in the same extent, you're like, what does that actually mean? So having somebody pick apart whole scenes and be like, show me here, and this is what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you learn so much from that process to make your writing better. And as you do, you get better at it. So I'm hoping the next couple books, I don't need as much editing, but I learned so much from the process of editing, just teaching me, and also, I've done some script writing, and you don't ever want to cut anything out. You have scenes that are your babies, and the same with writing. And then you have someone come in and be like, yeah, cut it mercifully with an axe. And you're like, I don't want to. And then you're like, yeah, but it makes the story flow better. So I get it. You're like, cut it down. And to have someone do that for you teaches you what becomes essential to a story, to writing, because we all want to tell these, huge stories, and we write 200,000 words, and it's like, there's way too much here. And like, I love Tolkien, but he can take like 10 pages to describe a tree, and that doesn't really work. And for someone who's not Tolkien, and learning when it's right to describe something, when it's not appropriate, when the story is getting too long, what's important to telling the story to keep that streamlined. So I learned a lot. I did.
I really love the way you described the scenery, because it wasn't overly done, but you brought us right in there into the thick of it.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I tried to.
That's what made it scarier. Because it just seems so real, and you're like, no, not that.
I think what makes it scary too is I get supernatural, but it's very real in the sense of you're dealing with killers here. Next book's a little more supernatural. We're dealing with vampires. But but the intimate level of killing somebody, and you're a human being, even if you're being influenced by a demonic power, there's something horrible about that,
Right.
psychologically. And that brings about a reality to it that, wow, this is something that can happen. Because, I do believe that demons influence people. I work with handicapped people currently, and we deal with handicapped people who have committed crimes. And a lot of them have psychological issues, and some of them are psychotic, but yet they didn't. There's a difference. What chooses someone who's suffering from the mental issues of psychosis, turning them into a killer, or someone that could, like 99% of people who suffer with psychosis, could live a normal life and never kill anybody. But yet there's this 1% that somehow become these horrible people. What is it that causes that? So I think when you look at it, you have to believe that there is such a thing as evil, and there are such a things as demons, and there are such a things that influence humanity. And so I think when you're dealing with that in this context of the story, that's really, in a way, what, Stephen, you don't justify what he's done, but in the same extent, if this thing hadn't pushed him at the right time, would he have become what he became? And so, yes, he's horrible. There's no justification for it, but there was a push, and a continuing push that starts subtle and continues to get more and more and more as you allow that thing more control over your life, till eventually it takes him over and away completely. And again, we'll get more of that in the next books when we continue this story between the two characters and the brothers.
How many will be in the series?
Currently 5 are slated. Death. Book 2 is famine. Book 3 is going to be called Wrath. Book 4 is Plague, and Book 5 is War. I'd like to write. This is what I've got planned out, and obviously I write slow because I have to work. So I'm not like a lot of indies who can put 5 books out in a year. If I get 1 out a year, I'm lucky. And then I'd like to write two prequels: The Shogun and The Musketeer. Those I'd like to tell their backstories. So.
Excellent. But you're also, your bio said you're an avid vocalist, worship leader, and you like to belt out Disney tunes.
I do. Yes.
That's such a contrast from what you write. Well, actually, Disney can be dark, but not that
Disney
dark.
can be dark. Yeah, just The Hunchback of Notre Dame is very dark. I mean, I'm not a dark person by nature, but I've dealt with evil. And so, when you counsel teenage kids or college-age kids, and you counsel people that have been abused, and you counsel people that have faced horrible things that have been done to them and had to live horrible lives, you deal with evil, and you deal with the after effects of evil. So, and from my own personal supernatural experience, which I'm not really going to get into, but having dealt with the demonic realm and understanding how real it is, it becomes easier to write about that. And so then, my mother would always say, understanding your enemy is very important. So understanding how they think and how it works is important to countering it. So I can write about it because I know how my enemy works. So that's kind of, but it also is super. I mean, it's going to get, I'll be honest with you, it's going to get more fantasy as it goes along. There's a broader world out there that these characters are going to begin to interact with. The first book was very intimate. And I'm trying to keep it intimate, but also expanding this greater universe that supernatural beings, some of which are realistic, some of them aren't. Like vampires aren't real.
Really?
And so, well, not that I'm aware of, anyway. So I've never encountered one. Not psychic vampires, but they're different. So, but yeah. So, but that, yeah.
Well, I thought this one fit really well into a little bit of the Christian fiction, definitely the horror, definitely fantasy. But it was just such a well-woven story. And it just really sucks you in. So you are reading it in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it can be scary. I'm glad you were sucked in, because you wonder, I've had friends read it, but you wonder, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on Amazon. So, you wonder if people that aren't your friends really enjoy it, because I haven't had a whole lot of feedback. So I'm glad that you enjoyed it. It makes me feel good that I told a good story. Hopefully my next book is told as well.
No, I think it'll do really well. It's definitely has that whole supernatural element to it, really strong convictions that are not blatantly put out there, but woven into the story, especially the conflicting values, um, making choices.
It's what life's about, right? Making choices, living with
Definitely.
the consequences. That's
But
at the boundaries of it. Yeah.
but when I went back and read your bio after reading the book, which is usually the way I do it, I was really surprised to find that your other pursuits include knitting, knitting.
Not really. That's a joke.
Oh, okay. So
I
canning is
started.
out too.
Yeah, I actually had I had a blog years ago, which is kind of where that comes from. It was Single Parent's Guide to the Universe, because I was a single parent for the longest time. And I used to start out, my neighbor had a blog, and she was a canner and a knitter. And I would always joke about how she has more views than I do. So that's kind of where it came up. And I would joke about my own canning and knitting. So that's kind of where I got that from. It stayed as a joke for me. But yeah, no, I don't care. I do cosplay on occasion with my kids, but that's, and I'm a singer and I'm a writer, and I do some film. I'm branching a bit into voice acting myself, when I get the opportunity, but my job requires a lot. I work with, a very important population that a lot of people don't want to work with. And so we're always running and staffing crises, and I really feel like it's an important aspect of life. So it takes a lot of time, but it's something that's very necessary because people forget about the handicapped and the developmentally disabled, and particularly those that have issues that have committed crimes. It's easy just to they get lost in the system. Sometimes their own families don't want anything else to do with them because some of the crimes they've committed are very heinous. But they're not mentally able to really understand what they've done, a lot of them. And so working with these people is very important. So, I feel like it's an important thing that I do.
Definitely, but doesn't it take a toll on you after a while?
Yeah, sure. It's emotionally draining, which is one of the reasons why writing for me is slower than maybe some other people, because I have a certain amount of time that I'm able to do that mentally, because, say I have 2 days off in a week. One of those days is usually spent recuperating mentally. And then, the other day I try to spend writing and working in this environment and, promoting and making relationships with other writers and with my fans if they're reading the book, learning how to sell books, which is a big part of being a writer. It's all new to me.
How do you not lose your place if you're not consistently writing every day to keep that story flowing the way that you do?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just kind of how I'm a pantser. So for me, I just sit down and let the story flow, but I'm always thinking about it. So even when I'm out at work, I'm always thinking about the story, thinking about the characters, thinking about where they're talking to me, not in a schizophrenic way, but, they're talking to me. I mean, I work with schizophrenic people, so I have to specify that. No job, New York, state of New York, I am not schizophrenic, but, they talk to you in your head. So for me, I'm always thinking about it. So then when I sit down, and I've started this book in particular because I want to try something different. I'm not great at outlining because I am a pantser. So I've started outlining about 4 chapters ahead, so that when I sit down to write, I have an idea of where I'm going. And then I always reread the chapter previous before, or what I've written if I'm in the middle of a chapter, so that I kind of get a feel for where I'm at, and then usually I can snap right back into. And I listen to a lot of music to set the mode. So that's a big thing for me. I got to have my desk right here with my music in my ear, and then I can write. So I might flip right back in. It's kind of like cinematic for me. So I see it like a movie unfolding. That's how I try to write it. Like it's
Like
these are
Silence
scenes.
of the Lambs or something?
Yeah, well, yeah, I love Silence of the Lambs. I haven't read the books, but I love Hannibal Lecter as a character.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I like the Joker. Villains are more fun to write. I'm not gonna lie, because they get in. You have to think differently. my hero, heroes can be very basic and they're fun in their own right, but it's like, character villains are easier to create and make interesting and flawed as opposed to a hero sometimes, because heroes tend to be the good guys. So you making them flawed is a little bit harder to make them to also, for me, because I'm a big Superman fan and a Captain America fan. I like my heroes fairly not flawed. So then when I get into the villains, it's a lot easier to make them flawed, so they become a little more interesting to write because they're flawed.
Yeah, they were very interesting. Do you think that some of the traits of the villain in this story were taken from things you learned about the traits of people that you worked with?
Sure, absolutely. And I've studied it. So, when I was writing these characters, I would read about it, watch videos with interviews of serial killers, listen to what they say about stuff. So you can kind of get into that mentality of how they think. And I did find this frightening. You have some that have a reason for what they do, and it's like, I kill these women because they remind me of my mom who abused me. Then you have some that it's just what they do, like BTK or Ted Bundy. You know what I'm saying? Which
Yeah.
Jeffrey Dahmer had a better idea of why he did what he did. At least he kind of had an idea, but some of them are just evil. It's like it's demonic. And so, choosing how to convey that in the characters, you'll see as it goes too, because I'm going to get more into different psychology of these main characters as we go along. Because so I don't want to give away too much, because then it's not fun to read my book.
Right. Don't give away too much, but it is super, super scary. It makes you think.
I'm glad. It's what it was designed for, so I'm glad.
Well, you definitely hit the mark. And thank you for sharing so much about how you came to write these, your background. It makes it
Thank you.
even more interesting to read again.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, my
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. Thanks again. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you want a really good Christian horror fantasy, Jason Kiefer will not let you down. He will scare you.